included video sew along means that I can clearly show you every step of each process, whether you prefer written or video instructions. So I wanted a new everyday bag that I could use day and night, both as a crossbody or something I could drop into a larger bag or tote when I'm lugging more stuff around. And decided to design a bag that's both fun and functional and means that I don't have to carry a separate wallet too. So let's have a look at this lovely bag. As always, suitable for sewing on a domestic machine. It has a meticulously designed zip closing interior wallet with feature profile stitching. Plenty of room in there for cash and with credit card slots which each hold numerous cards. This was actually something I developed for my turnaround crossbody in 2017, but as I sold hardly any patterns in those days, I thought I'd incorporate it into this new little crossbody as it's such a useful feature. There are separate lining pieces for a super snug fit, and the bag turns through the front pocket at the end, so the inside remains just as neat and pristine as the outside. I just love this front concealed zipper pocket. A concealed centered zipper is something you might have seen on a jacket before, but it's seldom explored in the realms of bag making, so I decided it would be a great way to transform a functional front zip pocket into a focal point and elevate the entire design. And I've devised a quick and simple method to ensure a neat, even assembly. Having previously created numerous patterns featuring gussets and box bottoms to add depth to the bottom of a bag, I thought this time I'd add a darted bottom to provide a smooth rounded shaping and give a 3D spacious interior. The Starburn has discreet inbuilt carrier tabs with D-rings for use with its adjustable and detachable strap. This makes it easy to adapt to use as a clutch or use as a pouch in a larger tote for extra organisation. The strap carriers aren't just an afterthought either. They're bedded into the bag structure to add not just strength but also shaping to the bag sides. The crossbody strap can be made of webbing, or you can make with self fabric, or even use it with a bought leather shoulder strap. The neat main zip opens to give full access to allow the bag to open as wide as possible. It has a surprisingly spacious compartment inside, and of course the inbuilt wallet means you no longer need to carry a separate wallet and so frees up valuable space within your bag for other necessities. I've been carrying my notebook, phone, Kindle, keys, hairbrush and even a matching little pencil case. The approximate finished dimensions of the bag in centimetres first is 26 by 18 by 4, and in inches that's 10 1/4 by 7 by 1.5 inches deep. It's a good vehicle for printed panels too. I've kept the front of this one quite plain and added a printed panel to the back so that I can use it whichever way round the mood takes me. The video contains lots of extra tips too, such as adding these little zip pulls to zing your bag up. I also explain the reasons we do things as we go along, so it helps to build your bag making skills that you can then use on projects going forward. So let's talk fabrics for a minute. The Starburn pattern is suitable for a huge range of fabrics, from the lightest quilt cotton to the heaviest oilskin or cork. Have a look at the incredible tester pics to whet your appetite. Your choice of fabrics will personalise the Starburn and change it completely. It can look elegant, glitzy, unisex, fun, functional, whatever your sewing heart desires. I'm sending out a heartfelt thank you to all my dedicated sewing testers here. Your feedback hopefully ensures that every stitch, seam and detail of my patterns meet the highest standards. Thank you for being an essential part of this journey. Decorate the Starburn as you wish, make it with a crossbody strap for everyday use, or glam it up as a clutch. The Starburn Crossbody sewing pattern is available now as an instant download PDF on my website or on Etsy, or by clicking on the link below this video. There's a huge range of patterns on my website, so why not pop over there to www.spencerog.com to take a look. Sign up to my newsletter to be the first in the know with any new patterns, tutorials and general Spencer Og news. Join our helpful Facebook group to show off your makes, ask questions and find bag making advice. Subscribe here on YouTube for dozens of my free bag making how-to tutorials and lots of free 30-minute makes. All the links to my social platforms can be found in my bio. I hope you love the look of the new Starburn Crossbody bag. If you do, grab the pattern and let's go sew. Thank you for purchasing this Spencer Rog sewing pattern for the Starburn Crossbody bag. And let's jump right into the tutorial. So first of all, let's talk about fabrics for the outer. So it seems to make up beautifully in just about anything I throw at it, but I will show you a few recommended fabrics. So have a look at cork, waterproof canvas, oilskin and waxed canvas, cordura, all sorts of cottons, canvas, quilt cotton, denim. Looks great in upholstery fabrics. And we'll talk more about the interfacing suitable for those in a minute. Also, I'd like to talk about vinyl. Vinyl can be used completely successfully in this pattern. It looks really nice, no reason not to use it, but there is one caveat. We do have a stitch line on the front of the bag, and it's a temporary stitch line where we make this concealed zipper. So we stitch this together and then unpick it afterwards. So there is a line of stitching being removed here. So just be careful on some of the heavy vinyls that you don't get obvious puncture holes. So if I show you just inside there, as I say, it's not on the front of the bag, so it's not very obvious anyway. You can see just on the top of there are some tiny little puncture holes if you open it and look. But you have to look pretty hard. So I will leave the choice to you as to whether you want to use vinyls or not. It does make up very nicely. It's just that line of stitching that you want to consider. Now you can also use panels for this bag. The printed panels look really nice. So I've used it on there. I've used one. Obviously all panels are different sizes, so I haven't got a pattern piece specifically for a panel. All you need to do is stitch a piece of self fabric either side of your panel and then put your paper pattern piece on and cut it out, and then you've got your shaped piece, so you don't actually need a separate pattern piece for that, but they can be used very successfully. So back to interfacing for your outer fabrics. So firmer fabrics like your vinyls, cork, waterproof canvas, waxed cottons, corduras, anything nice and heavyweight which has its own structure and firmness doesn't need interfacing. You can see what I mean by that. It's going to hold its own shape. No interfacing necessary on outers for those. When you come to your cottons, if you're using a heavyweight cotton like a canvas or even a upholstery weight, and you see they start to be a little limp, you don't necessarily want that structure on your bag, you want something a little bit firmer. So to those I would add denim as well. I'd add a medium weight fusible interfacing such as an SF101 Hemline or a Vilene F220 or a G700. Basically it doesn't matter if it's a woven or a non-woven, it's just going to give it that extra bit of body. If you do want to use a super lightweight fabric such as a quilt cotton, then still use your medium weight fusible on there, but I would also add a layer of low loft fusible fleece such as Vilene H640, something that's not too bulky, a compressed fleece if you can get it, but it'll just add that extra bit of firmness and body to your fabric. So just as an example, this one was made with quilt cotton and with medium weight fusible and a lightweight wadding. And this one I make up in the written directions so you can see how the fleece is applied and everything. This one is a firm waterproof canvas and I haven't used any interfacing on the outer on that. Now I personally like this bag quite flexible, but feel free to play around with your interfacings. Hold 2 layers together of your outer fabric of what you'd like to use. So for example, say you want to use an upholstery fabric, hold 2 layers together, put a couple of layers of your lining inside and just kind of make it up as it's going to be. Put in a couple of layers of interfacing in there. Are you happy with that firmness? Is that going to give you what you want? Is that going to be firm enough? Is that how you would like your finished bag to be? If not, you can build it up, obviously. You can use fleece in there, but you might not want any more bulk. I wouldn't want any more bulk in that, so I would add probably a layer of Decaville Light. If I was wanting a very firm bag with a quilt cotton, I might just use Decaville Heavy. So you can choose the firmness of this bag that you actually want. So in the pattern instructions, I've used medium weight fusible with fleece on quilt cotton. And today I'll make one up in vinyl so you can see the difference, and I won't use any interfacing at all on the outer. So let's briefly talk about lining fabrics. Lining, I suggest just a regular quilt weight cotton and add a layer of medium weight fusible interfacing to that. Just your regular SF101, G700 or F220 from Violin. So that's fabrics. Let's move on to the hardware. First, we need 3 zips. Choose nylon coil zips for this project as we're going to be cutting them to fit, and choose zips at the given length or longer. I'd see the pattern document for the actual lengths we're going to cut them to. So first of all, we need 2 number 5 nylon coil zips. And this is for the outside of the bag, so we would need 1 for the top and 1 for the front pocket, and I like to keep those the same, matching, because it just keeps the bag in balance. So I like to keep the same colour and the same type of zip. You could use a bigger puller on the top or a bigger puller in the middle, whatever you think, but I'm going to keep them even. So we're going to cut 2 lengths of that. We'll discuss that as we go along. And we need a number 3 zip for the inside pocket. The number 3 or number 5, refers to the width of the teeth. So number 3 is 3mm and number 5 is a 5mm, and that's the teeth width. That's not the width of the tape. The tape on a number 5 zip is slightly wider than a number 3. We tend to use a number 5 zip on the outside of a bag as it makes more of a feature or a statement, and we want a zip with smaller teeth, i.e. a number 3 for the inside of the bag for any pockets, so it doesn't make bulges. Other things we're going to need: webbing for the strap. I'm using 1-inch wide webbing, and I would advise to choose 100% cotton or nylon seatbelt webbing where possible. I personally don't like the polyester webbing. I think it looks a little bit cheap, but if you've got a nice one and you're happy to use it, don't let me stop you. It's just all personal preference. There are also instructions how to make your own strap from self fabric if you want to. We need 2 D-rings, and those are 3/4 inch D-rings. We need a 1-inch tri-glide or slider or just a bar, whatever you want to call it, and we're matching that to the size of our webbing. Can't say it, webbing. We need 2 1-inch swivel hooks to go with our webbing width. We need a metal zip end for finishing the top zip nicely. I'm going to put a badge on the outside of my bag. You could also use an applique or a patch or embroider the outer panel before you started. I'm going to use a sewing badge or a sewing label on the inside so everybody knows it's mine. And you're going to need some double-sided tape for applying the zips if you like to use it. I'll probably just use clips. And you need some matching or contrasting thread. You'll probably need some snacks along the way. I will discuss those as we go. So onto the pattern itself. Onto the pattern and printing instructions. So open your pattern document with Adobe Reader. It's a free program and it's probably already on your device. If it's not on there, there's a link in the written instructions to download it for free. And so open it with Adobe Reader and print at 100% size. When you print them out, there's a measured control box on the first page of the pattern pieces, and you can check the size before cutting out anything. If you do need any help with opening and printing PDF patterns, then I've got a full video to help, which I'll link in the text below, along with a number of other helpful videos that you will find useful throughout this pattern. Just scroll down to the text underneath the video, scroll down there underneath, and you'll find all the links. I'll also link many of the items I've used, the notions and the fabrics and anything I think useful. A couple of quick tips for this pattern before we begin. I suggest a 1 inch wide webbing, but you can substitute it for any width of webbing you want. Just change your swivel hooks and adjust a buckle or tri-glide to match the width of your chosen webbing. Keep the D-ring itself and the carriers at the stated 3/4 of an inch. We don't need to go bigger on those. If you're using continuous zip, zigzag stitch the ends closed so there's no danger of accidentally removing the puller during construction. If you're using a directional fabric, it should look the same direction as the writing on the pattern piece and the grain line. So you'll see if the writing's that way, keep your print that way up too. Leave your pattern pieces pinned to your cut pieces, or use the handy labels included to easily identify your cut pieces. As usual, backstitch at the beginning and end of every seam. Trim loose threads as you go, press at every stage for a smart finish, and use a pressing cloth if you're using vinyl or something that's inclined to melt. And save paper, follow the instructions on screen and just print the pattern pieces. We all need to save trees these days. So print, cut and fuse everything according to the cutting chart. Add your notches and any marks for darts and things that are shown on the pattern pieces. These are just marks, by the way, they're not cutouts, it is stated on there. And then we're ready to make a start. The seam allowance is 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch all the way throughout, unless otherwise stated, but I will tell you at every stage. So let's start with our lining. So let's start with the lining, and first of all we're going to make our credit card slots. We love a credit card slot. So we're just going to need pieces G and H for this section. I'll put H to one side for the moment. So G is my credit card slots themselves. The pattern piece is taped together in the middle. That's not a fold line, by the way, that is just where you tape the pattern piece together. First of all, I'm going to add a notch at each of these fold lines, A, B, C and D on each side, and you'll see there's 4 little notch marks, and I'm just going to make a snip less than the seam allowance, i.e. less than 1 centimetre in each of those notches, or at each of those notches. Just a very small snip. And this is going to make it much easier to fold the pattern piece into place accurately. So I'll show you on the paper pattern piece first because it's easier, and then we'll head off and do it on the ironing board and press them in place. So we're going to fold at line A, and you'll see that from your 2 notches. You can draw lines across if you want. You're going to have it right way up, and you're going to pinch at line A and bring it up to meet line B. So as I say, I'll show you on the paper pattern piece first. So A to B, press in place, and then line C, pinch up and lay it on line D. So you end up with a folded credit card section like that, which will fit exactly onto your piece H, on the side of your piece H. So I'm going to take this to the ironing board and do exactly the same thing. I'm going to pinch at line A, fold to line B, pinch at line C and fold to line D. And I'm using the notches to help me keep that all in line. So I'll just head over and press that in place now. I better actually set my sewing machine up as well. I seem to be missing something. Could be important. So I pressed my panel at the ironing board. I've pressed along line A, pulled it up to meet line B, pressed along line C, and pinched it up and laid that on line D, just as a paper pattern piece. You see the arrows to show you what to do. So I've pressed that in place, make sure it's nice and straight, make sure it matches the same height as your credit card slot side piece, H. And the first thing I'm going to do is edge stitch the top of both of these pocket folds, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Now on my machine today, I have got a microtex needle, but purely because I'm using vinyl for the outer. I wouldn't need it for the lining that I'm going to be making up in quilt cotton today. I'll just use a regular needle. I've got a stitch length of 2.9 on there. If we're doing top stitching, it's nice to have a longer length of stitching. My machine isn't brilliant once it goes over a size 3, so I tend to stick at a 3 maximum. The foot I'm using, I have got a walking foot on the machine. Again, that's predominantly because I'm using vinyl. The foot is a walking foot, but I've also got a blind hemming foot on there as well. So to say, you don't need a walking foot for quilt cottons, it's there because I'm using vinyl. What is usually really helpful all the time is a blind hemming foot for keeping an equal distance from the edge when doing top stitching, and I have it on machine all the time. So let's top stitch the top of those 2 pockets. So just lift them away and make a line of stitching. I thought I'd choose my thread really carefully so you'd be able to see it, because it was a contrast, but of course the rest of my lining is this fabric, so you will be able to see it on there. It's just difficult to see on this, but hold that close. Hopefully you can see that I've just top stitched those 2 top edges of the pockets. Now I'm just going to baste along the sides just to hold that in place, because I don't want it to move. So again, within the seam allowance, I'll just leave that blind hemming foot on. So trim at every stage, make sure you've got no loose threads hanging around. Trimmity trim trim. They're always a lot harder to get afterwards, so keep it tidy as you go. So next we'll assemble the credit card unit, and this is our back pocket lining. So we're going to be putting them on the sides here. Now let's make sure I get those the right way up. That one. Yes, because they are directional. I'm going to lay them to the side, and then I'm going to flip them over so it's right sides facing. So I'll do one first. I'm going to stitch along there with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And let's take that blind hemming foot off now. Same with the other side. I can open that out for the time being, get it out of the way. Same with this side. Clip it on. I always use clips, I never really use pins much anymore. So much handier because you can flip it over and stitch from either side. Trim up. So I'm going to take that to the ironing board and just press that open and away. So I've pressed those away from the credit card slots, seam allowances going outwards. And now I'm just going to top stitch down the sides here. So 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. It gives it a nice finish, but it also helps hold those seam allowances back and everything in place. You can do 1 line of stitches, or you can do 2 lines of stitches, whatever takes your fancy. Again, you could put your blind hemming foot back on. I haven't, because I'm going to do 2 lines of stitching. There we are, trim up. And that's my credit card unit finished. Looks very pretty. And that is the back lining of my inside pocket. So I'm going to prepare the zip now for that lining pocket. So I'm going to take my number 3 zip. So that's the smaller one, or the one with the number 3 size teeth. I'm going to trim the length of the zip to 20 centimetres or 8 inches. And I want to remove any stoppers as well, so I might mark it first just so you can see. So I want to get rid of any of these. It's small, isn't it? That was the big zip I was using. So I'll just trim that off. That's the beauty of nylon zips. Make sure your zip puller is within there, or you won't be using that zip again. Yeah. Grab a couple of clips, and then I'm going to take my zip tabs for lining pocket, and those are pieces J. They're listed under strips to cut with a ruler. There's not a paper pattern piece for those, but they're still on the cutting chart at the bottom. So cut those out, and I'm going to take them and lay them on each end. So I'm going to lay them directly at the end of the zip. We do actually want them to be exactly the width of your zip, so we'll probably have to trim them down otherwise, but I never know what, if somebody's going to use a 3 zip or a 5 zip, so I always make them a little bit wider. Might be easier to just run over that end first, cinch it together. Yep. So that side is going onto the end there. So it's butted up right across the end of the zip. So that still measures 8 inches or 20 centimetres. We haven't extended it out anywhere. So I'm just going to stitch each edge, each short edge with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Make sure they're on nice and straight. And as I say, we do want those to be the same width as our zip, because that will make sure we have a nice straight edge at the top of the pocket. So you can see how I'm slightly wider on these. As I say, I always like to make them or ask you to cut them a little bit wider, because I never know if you're going to use the width of the zip that I put in the pattern. Just trim them so they're exactly the same width as your zip now. That one looks wider because the zip's open. So open that out and press in place. I'll just finger press for speed. Fold your zip in half to find the centre, and we're finding the centre of the zip. So from where the seams are, match those seams and find the centre point. I'll just mark it with this for now. A bit scruffy. And then we're going to attach these to our back lining and construct our back lining pocket. So I'm going to grab my lining back and front pieces E. So I've grabbed my pieces E. I only need one of these at the moment, so I'll take one of them, put the other one to one side. I'm going to slit this one across to insert our pocket, but we're not going to slit this one. That's going to remain whole. So I'll put that one to one side. So this is us constructing our back lining pocket. This is piece E, just one of them, and I'm going to place a ruler on there, and I'm going to slit it 4 centimetres or 1.5 inches down from the long top edge. the long straight top edge. Get my hand in there properly. Don't want to go wrong, do I? So you can just slit it like that, or you could draw a line on it and cut it with scissors, anything that gives you a nice clean cut. So I'm now going to call these pieces an upper back lining and a lower back lining. I'm going to add a woven label, completely optional, to my lower back lining, and I'm going to place that centrally, 2.5 centimeters or an inch down from the top. Make sure it's about central. There we are. I'll just edge stitch that on. Should pin it really. Actually, a little piece of double-sided tape is normally quite good to hold that nice and firmly. I'm going to place my upper back lining just to the side for now. I'm going to work on the lower back lining. I'm going to place that with right sides uppermost, and I'm going to mark the centre top. So just fold it in half. You can place a little notch or just a mark. And then I'm going to grab the zip we've just been working on. I'm going to place that right side down on top with my zip puller to the left when closed. I'm going to match up those centre points. So free edge of the zip tape along the long straight edge. I'm going to clip that in place. You can see now why we trimmed the zip tabs to exactly the same width as the zip, because we don't want any movement in that. We want it to be equal. If you'd left it wider, you might be inclined to pull that down a little bit and you'll end up with a bulge in that. So best to always snip it to the same width as your zip. Lots of clips. Keep it nice and firm. And then using a zipper foot, I'm going to stitch all the way across the top edge with a 6mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to put the zipper foot on my machine. Move the puller halfway if you need to. So that's my zip attached. I'm now going to trim those zip tabs to match the width of the lining. So easier to flip it over and just see on the other side. Lay it right side uppermost again and grab your inside pocket lining front piece F. I'm going to mark the centre of the top of that as well. Keep putting that pen away. I should just keep it out. I mean, a fold will do the job. You can see it, but there we go. Mark it on the back. I need it on the back. And I'm going to lay that face down on top of that zip edge, that same zip edge that we've just stitched. I'll zip to the middle for now. So make sure your pocket print is the right way up if it has got a directional print. So that's my centre top, that's my centre top. I'm going to match those straight down on the top. So right sides together. So you see the zip in the middle there as a sandwich. And then again with a zipper foot, I'm going to stitch all the way across with a 6mm seam allowance. That's a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Don't stop at the end of the pocket. We're going to go right from edge to edge. So now I'm going to take that to the ironing board. I'm going to flip that up and to the back. That's so my pocket piece and my lining are then wrong sides together, and that'll expose my zip tape again, and I can work on the other side of the zip. So let me just give that a quick press. So there's my pressed lower back lining. I apologise for my pressing. It's not up to par. My iron broke last week, so I'm using an old one out of the cupboard until I get around to buying a new one. And it doesn't get the creases out properly. Probably doesn't heat up. It's been in the cupboard for about 20 years, I think. Now I'm going to top stitch the lining from edge to edge, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from this folded edge under the zip. Catching in both lining and the pocket lining, so that's staying down at the back. I've left my zipper foot on, just so I can get close to the zip. Trimity trim. So lay your outer back lining unit down again with right side uppermost and with your zip to the top. Grab this upper back lining piece, the strip that we cut off previously, and I'm going to lay it face down on top, lining up the free edge of the zip tape with one long straight edge of this upper back lining. Now just make sure, again, if you've used a directional print, that it's going in the right direction. So look at it the right way and then flip it down over, if that makes sense. Clip that to the top, to that nice free edge of the zip tape. And then again, using a zipper foot, I'm going to whiz all the way across there with a 6mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So that's my upper back lining attached across that top edge. I'm going to flip that over so the wrong side of the lining is visible, and you're going to see the right side of the attached pocket. I'm going to grab my back pocket lining with credit card slots. I'm going to lay that right side down on top centrally, lining up the top edge of the pocket piece with the zip edge. And make sure that your credit card slots are facing upwards towards the zip. You don't want them upside down, they're not very handy then. So flip that straight onto the other pocket. We're lining up with that pocket basically, and then the top edge of that zip. So make sure your sides are in line, make sure the top edge is in line. Here's my zip, so you can see what's happening there. Inside is right sides together, those credit card slots are facing up towards the zip, sides are lined up, and the top edge is lined up too. And again, zipper foot on, and I'm going to stitch all the way across the top from edge to edge with a 6mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So once again, I'll take that to the ironing board, and from the right side I'm going to press that upper lining away so we can see the full extent of the lining piece. So I'm pressed and that's looking much better. I'm going to flip it over, and with both pocket pieces laying flat, both downwards towards the bottom of the panel, you'll see that your lower pocket piece is slightly longer. We started with the same size, but because of your zip, that's dropped that a little bit, so we're just going to trim that off. I'll leave that little bit on the bottom to trim off, because if you use a different zip width or a different stitch width, different seam allowance width, then that will alter the amount of pocket that's left over on the bottom, shorter or longer. So better to leave a little bit and then you can trim off the excess afterwards. So let's flip it over again. And now I'm going to top stitch the upper back lining 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from that folded seam edge. So we're top stitched above and below the zip. Now we need to deal with securing this pocket into place. So I'm going to flip the unit over, so we're wrong side uppermost, put your zip puller to the middle so it doesn't get in the way. I'm working from this side so I can see the edges of the pocket. I'm going to stitch through pocket and lining down the first side, across the bottom and back up the second with a 6mm or a 1/4 inch seam allowance, finishing at the seam line of the upper part. So you've got your seam line and you've got your top stitch, and just finish at those stitch lines at the top. Don't go any further or you'll see it further up on the front. And that will secure our wallet in place. Make sure that's trimmed nicely on the front. And then just to doubly secure this, it's completely optional, this operation, but to doubly secure it, because it is going to be a wallet, a very handy wallet, you're going to have your fingers in and out of this all the time, so I want to make sure it's really sturdy. I'm going to do a second line of stitching just inside that, so it'll give it a look of twin needle, it'll look nicer, and it'll finish it off with a bit of extra added strength. So again, just 6mm inside the first stitch line, so down there, across the bottom and back up. In fact, you can go, if you want to make a feature of it, you can go above the top as well, do an extra line above the top, completely optional. There we are, so I've gone across the top as well with that, so inside the original stitch line, and this time I've gone up and over the top, and those stitch lines give you a little bit of top stitching on your zip tab too. Just finishes it off really nicely, makes it look very professional, and you're ready with your extremely handy wallet pocket. Put your cash in the front and your cards in the back section. So now we're ready to add darts to our bag, and these are going to give the volume inside. So grab both pieces, your completed piece and your other piece that you haven't touched yet. That's your lining back and front, and you'll see on the pattern piece that we have dart lines matched. So transfer those marks to the reverse of your pattern pieces. Now I've already done it, but basically I would just put the pattern piece on top. I put a little snip at the ends of each of those darts, put a dot in the top, and then I'll join the lines up with a ruler. So do that for both front and back lining. I'm going to make those darts. So let's make one first. So with right sides together, I'm going to fold along the centre of that dart and match the two notches on the ends. I'm matching the lines I've drawn, one on top of the other, and that fold should go straight through the centre point there. So you're not matching that bottom edge. You see one side might come up a little bit more. That's fine. We're folding along the centre of the dart, and we're matching that line with that line, and the notches you made should lie on top of each other there. So I'm now going to stitch literally just along that line, and remember to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. So that's one dart made. So that's the wrong side and that's the right side, and you can see how that gives volume to the bag. So it's a nice alternative to using gussets or a box bottom. It still gives us that volume, but it's just another method of doing it. So I'll continue and do the other 3 darts. trim them up, give them a press, and that's your lining panels complete. We just need to join those together. So I'm going to place those right sides together, and I'm going to clip and place all the way along. Should have brought some more clips. So match the edges first. If you did happen to use a different zip width to me, or you used a different seam allowance at this seam, you may find that this panel is slightly shorter or longer than your solid panel. Don't worry if that's the case, just trim a tiny bit off the top edge of whichever is slightly longer. It should only be a fraction of an inch, fraction of a centimetre anyway. So clip in place. When you get to the darts, we're going to nest the darts. And what I mean by nesting is one way and one the other, and that just reduces bulk as we're going over it. Because we'll have the same in the outer as well, so we don't want too many layers all in one place. I'm going to stitch around that, all those three sides, with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm leaving that top long edge open. So that's our lining stitched together. I'm going to grab my scissors. Now, if you do worry about sewing nice smooth curves, I've got a video to help with that, and it has some printable worksheets as well, and I'll link that below. So I'm going to press the seam allowance open at this top edge here. It just helps with when we come to attach the outer and the lining together, it'll just reduce bulk. So I'll press that seam open, and I'm going to snip and trim the seam allowance by half at the curve. So I'll snip it first, just to make it lie nicer in the finished bag. So snip that. Don't worry about snipping through the seam allowance of the darts, it's not a problem. You could even snip off the seam allowance of some of that dart just for a bit of extra bulk reduction. And I'll just trim those curves down to half. The seam allowance of the curves. I don't want to trim the curves off. Just all helps it lie flat. And that is our lining finished. Not too bad, was it? So we're ready to start on the outer, but first, guess what? It's time for a well-earned tea break. So this is tea break time for me. You won't believe these cakes that somebody's given me. Brilliant. Thank you. I've got to get the whole selection of these, I really do. Right, I'm going to open them, sorry. Please help yourself to one. This is the normal scruffy cup I have for my tea. It's a metal cup, so it keeps my tea warm, because I always procrastinate so long it takes me all morning to drink a big cup of coffee or tea. Right, shall I have one now? Yeah, I think I better add. Haha, I haven't put my face on this time, which means I can stuff it in one. Oh, nice. Right. So you can admire your lining while you're doing that. The lining is smaller than the outer, so it makes a really nice fit inside the bag. Let me show you the outer pieces, just so you can see the difference. So you can see it's a fair bit smaller. We've got our darts in there, obviously, but there's going to be no bagginess whatsoever there. Also, have a think about whether you want to decorate your outer panels while you're having your tea and biscuits or whatever it is you're having. Obviously I'm using plain fabrics, I'm using vinyl today as I mentioned, so I haven't got any interfacing on there. But I probably want to decorate this front panel with something. You might want to put an applique, you might want to use quilted fabric or printed fabric. I'm just going to put a badge on mine, but I'm going to use a big badge, so I've actually attached a little square of leather to the front already, just so I can put my badge in there afterwards, and it'll just look a bit more of a feature. As I say, decorate them however you wish, or use panels, use prints, anything you like to jazz them up. So let's move that lining out of the way and get started on our outer. So tea break is officially over and it's time to start work on our outer front. I'm using a vinyl, so I don't need any interfacing on the back. It's firm enough as it is. I've grabbed my pieces B and C, which is my upper and lower outer front. Ensure you've marked all the notches on there. So we've got 2 at the sides here, at the ends of this dotted line, and we've got the central points. Decorate them how you wish before you start. Just remember to stay clear of this, above this line. That's going to be your front. This is going to be the zip edge. So I've put a leather patch on there because I'm going to put a big old badge on there. So first of all, line them up. Make sure your prints are in the right direction if you're using directional prints. I'm going to flip the upper outer, get it right way up, flip the upper outer front piece B face down onto the lower outer front piece C, matching up the long straight edges and matching up these notches at the side. And then I'm going to draw a line, which I've already done, as you can see, from notch to notch. And that's 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch down from this long top edge. So this is where we're going to insert our zip. So we're going to need a larger seam allowance to create the 2 flaps, which are going to conceal the zip underneath. So that's why we need this big seam allowance. And this is going to be a temporary seam. So we're going to baste along this line to hold 2 pieces together just temporarily. So we're going to be removing the stitches after the zip's installed. So keep the stitches long. Don't back tack at the beginning or the end of the seam. And we're going to call this from now on our temporary seam. So I'll just clip that in place. So this is where I said be careful of your vinyl. Just check that it doesn't leave holes from your needle. It may leave tiny holes. This is fine actually, you can hardly see anything on this, but just double check on a spare piece before you start. It's not obvious once we remove the seam line or the stitch line, because it's kind of just inside the flap, so it's not like it's sat on the front of the bag. So it's just personal choice whether you want to use vinyl or not. I just want to make you aware that you could possibly get some stitch holes, visible stitch holes on the flap inside or just on the edge. So let's stitch that. So I'm stitching directly along that line. I'm going to stitch up my stitch length to the maximum my machine will do. So on here that's a 5. It may be a 4 on other machines. I'm going to stitch along here. I'm not going to back tack. So that's basted directly along that line I've drawn. I'm going to open that out, and that is our temporary seam where we'll be attaching our zip. I'm going to open that out, flip it over and open out that seam. Take it to the ironing board and give it a good press so that's nice and firmly held open. Obviously it's harder with vinyl and cork to press, but I am going to put a pressing cloth on the back and give it a little bit of a kiss with an iron, with my rubbish iron that I'm using at the moment. Back in a sec. So I've given it a press. I've also put a bit of Decaville on the back there, just where I'm going to apply the badge on the front. I'll show you that in a minute. It's obviously not holding down brilliantly. I might just try a little bit of double-sided tape as well, just to hold that down. As I say, you don't need it if it's fabric, because it'll press into place quite nicely. But let's do everything we can to make our life easier. Well, apart from pulling the backing off double-sided tape, of course, that's never easy. I've put it right on the edge. It's not very good double-sided tape, that. Actually, glue would be a better idea, as long as you weren't using glue that was going to come through to the front. Put one more bit on. That's a bit rubbish, isn't it? Rubbishy tape. Bane of my life. Actually, some of the better ones aren't that sticky. The ones that are really sticky gum all your needle up. It's catch-22. There we are. So I mean, you could use pins in there if it was fabric anyway, it wouldn't do it any harm. It's just because it's this vinyl. Same with cork. Let's clip that down. Okay, so that will do for now. So if you want to attach a badge, as I say, I've attached a patch already, but I'd put that on because I'm going to put a whacking great badge on the front. And I'm going to apply that 2.5 centimetres down, or an inch down from the temporary seam. That's why we want to put it on after we've made the seam, because you'd be tempted to put it on too high up otherwise, and I've done that a few times already. So I have marked my prongs on there centrally already. So let's get my trusty seam ripper in. Try and keep that even. I've also put, as I say, a little piece of Decaville on the back already, just to give it a really firm base. This should be a really, really firm base with a bit of leather on the front as well. Just makes the badge stand out a little bit better. You're kind of mounting it. So let's put it on the right way up and see if I've got equal holes. See if I've got it straight. It's a bit low. Let's move that up a bit. A bit further, it's a bit tight anyway. That's much better. So I'll flip that over and press my prongs, probably outwards. So backing plate on and press my prongs outwards. I should be using a ruler. Let me grab a metal ruler. Here we go. Love a metal ruler. Now you can put some fleece or something on the back of there if you want to make it doubly secure so nothing ever comes through your lining. But we're going to put the pocket on top of that, so I don't think there's any danger of anything coming through. So I'll leave that as is. There's our badge, hopefully nice and straight. Now, if you are using a very lightweight fabric such as quilt cotton, I did say at the very beginning you could apply some optional fleece at this point as well. So if you are adding the fleece, just knit to the pattern, and at this point in the pattern directions I'll show you where and how to apply that fleece. You'd apply it to both pieces now, your back and your front. We just want to keep it out of these seam allowances here, so it's cut slightly smaller. But as I say, it's all in your written directions. So that's our front ready and waiting for our outer front pocket. So we're going to construct our outer front pocket now. So I'm going to lay that to one side for the moment. So let's construct our outer front pocket. First of all, we're going to take our zip. That's our 14-inch zip or longer. I've just cut a 14-inch section from a piece of continuous zip. Make sure you've got a puller on it. I'm being lazy today, so I'm just going to staple the ends so I don't lose my zip puller. Which is my open end? That one. It is that one. Yeah, remove any end stoppers. We don't want any end stoppers breaking our needles. So staple or zigzag stitch the ends of both sides of this zip. And then grab your outer front pocket lining piece D and mark the centre point at the top edge. So we've got two of those. Let's mark the centre point on both. need to see it on the front on this one. I'll mark the back and the front. There we are. So I can see it whichever way up it is now. So I'm going to take one of those pieces. So lay that face up and then mark the centre of your zip. You don't really need to mark the centre. What you need to do is make sure you've got enough room on one side to have your zip puller pulled off the side so you don't have to stitch over it anywhere. So as long as you've got a little bit on one side, on the closed end, and plenty on the open end of the zip where your puller is, so you never have to touch it for a long time, you'll be fine. So let's clip that in place. So you notice I'm putting the zip the right way up and the fabric is the right way up. I know it sounds a bit wrong, but it's because this is the inside pocket. So double check, fabric is right way up, zip is right way up, puller is way over here, so it's not getting in your way. You're going to be able to stitch both sides without having to move it at all. When I say zip, zip puller. I want it fully fastened and out of the way. And then using a zipper foot, I'm going to stitch all the way across with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to lift that zip and press it away from the panel. So I want the seam allowance coming back towards the pocket. I think I'll press that for the moment. I'll press them both at the same time in a minute. So take your second outer front pocket lining piece, D, and lay that right side down on top, lining up the long straight edge of the pocket piece with the free edge of the zip tape. So long straight edge with the free edge of the zip tape. Again, right sides of pocket together, so your zip is looking like it's upside down. Line up the sides, clip in place. Turn it over to straighten it if you want. In fact, turn it over to sew it if you want. So we've got right sides of pocket together. The zip's looking like it's completely upside down, which is right. I am going to flip it over to sew it because it's easier to see the zip tape. And I'm going to stitch along there again with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we'll now take that to the ironing board. I'm going to open it out fully and give it a good press. So seam allowances away from the zip. Zip looks like it's on upside down. Perfect. Back in a moment. There we are, finished, nice and tidy. So now we're ready to add that to the outer. So grab your outer front again. I'm going to lay that wrong side uppermost. Make sure that the seam allowances are pressed nicely flat against the fabric. So I'm going to take my open pocket panel right side up and place it on top. So my pocket pieces are still open and spread away from the zip. I want to lay that zip directly along this temporary seam line, and I want my puller to the right when closed. Am I at the right? Yeah, always hard when you're upside down. Being on the right means it'll be on the left. Yes, closed when I turn it back round. So we're going to line up the sides, line up that zip exactly on the seam line. I'm going to clip it in place at the sides now. Feel free to use pins or anything to hold this in place if you're using fabric. If you're using vinyl or something, then you can use double-sided tape, but try and put it just on the outside edge of the seam allowances, because this is going to open up, and although it's going to be stitched at the very bottom, you're going to see most of this flap inside. So put any double-sided tape just below. Let me illustrate that. So if you are using double-sided, stick it on the very, very bottom or just beyond the bottom of the seam allowance. So only on the bottom one, not on the top one. Double-sided tape, pain of my life. No wonder I never have any nails. Right, so back to, I'm just going to place that. I'm going to stand up so I can get it absolutely spot on. So wrong side uppermost, right side uppermost. So we've got wrong sides facing. I'm going to place that zip directly, and that's the right sided zip, directly along that seam line. I'm going to line up the edges too. The same on that side, make sure that it's exactly on that line. You see, I'll just hold that up so you can see exactly on that line. Use double-sided tape here, don't put it over the top, just on the bottom edge. Okay, clip that in place. So I am now going to top stitch the bottom pocket lining only, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge. So leave the top. Some of my testers preferred to do it from the front, that's also fine. Just make sure you are catching in the zip tape. So make it a decent distance from your temporary seam line, but make sure you catch in that zip tape. If you do it from the back, you can actually see exactly where it is, and I think that's why I prefer it. So if you stay on that edge, 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge, you're absolutely catching it in, and it will give you a decent concealed zip flap. So that's one side top stitch. So if you turn it over, you'll see that that's giving you a nice profile stitch on the front. I have got a bit of a bump in there, but never mind. And then we're going to do the same with the top section, but we want the flap to be down. So in theory, we're top stitching in exactly the same position, which is just above that seam line of the zip where the zip's been attached, but we want the flap to be down. So push that down, clip the zip at the sides, and that seam line that we want it to be just above is this seam line where we attached the zip. So we just want it to be 3mm or 1/8 of an inch above that seam line, which will give us that same distance of 3mm or 1/8 of an inch below on that side. So you'll get an equal stitch on both sides, or an equal distance on your flap. So 3mm or 1/8 of an inch above there. So there we are. So that one's been top stitched down. Turn it over. Yay, squeal of delight, looks good. So that has kept that seam nice and flat, so when we open that, your zip will pop out and it's going to look fabulous. So as I say, you can stitch from the front or from the back. Just make sure that that zip is nice and flat, and that if you're sewing from the front, that you do catch in the tape. Make sure you're within the tape of the zip. Okay, so moving on to our next stage, let's finish off that pocket. So flip the unit over to the back. You'll see again your lower pocket is longer than your front pocket, and we just want to trim that to match. So we're trimming the bottom and we're trimming the sides as well. We've got a little extra bit side there too. Nice and matchy now. Now it's time to release that zip, so grab an unpicker and very, very carefully remove, however you want to remove it, that temporary seam line. So as long as you haven't bar tacked or back tacked at the beginning and end, you should be able to just pull that out. So I like to do a little bit at once. Kind of open it up. Use the other side of your unpicker. Which side do they tell you to use? It's the one with the bobble in it, but that cuts them in the middle. I don't want to cut it, I want to pull it out, because if I cut it, it'll leave lots and lots of ends. So let's gently just pull that out, one stitch at a time. Don't yank it out because we don't want any rips at this point. And the more you yank it, the more likely you are to get a hole in your vinyl. And just on that point, you can see on here, there is tiny, tiny needle holes, but it's negligible. And as I say, it's where they meet, so it's not on the outside. So personal preference as to whether you're happy with that. There's very little here that's visible. Okay, pull any loose ends out that you've got. Yeah, and you can see that we've formed this nice concealed zip. You see there's quite a nice flap on that. Plenty of room to get your zip backwards and forwards. And you can finally open it again. In fact, do open it again. Put it to the middle, because we're going to do something with those ends. Just before we do that, lift that bottom panel and turn a hem on the bottom of these pocket pieces. So we'll take it to the ironing board and press that up. We'll just press them up so they're matching, and that will help us when we're turning it through and closing the pocket afterwards. We actually turn it through at this pocket. So let me give that pocket piece a press. So I've pressed up a hem. I'm now going to deal with the sides of the pocket. So we're just going to stitch the angled sides of the pocket. Don't worry about this, we'll get this in the side seams later. So it's just those little angled sides we want to stitch now. So to do that, flip it over to the front and lift the lower outer front. So clip that in place. Didn't clip that very well today. So I'm just going to stitch these side seams with a 6mm or a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you can see just the angled sides, and don't worry if you can't get right to the end, it's not a problem, because we're going to be stitching all the way down here with a 1cm seam allowance, so you're going to be catching it in from about here anyway. So just along the angled sides. You could leave your zipper foot on if you wanted, that would make things easier. So that's those stitched. I say keep those hems turned up, and don't worry if you can't get right to the very top. It's not an issue, you're going to be catching it in later. Now we're going to stitch the sides just to secure that zip. So flip over again, and I'm just going to put a tack across the zip on both sides so it's not going anywhere. So double check that your zip is nowhere near the outsides now, you want it in the middle. So just stitch within the seam allowance over that zip edge. You can go from the top of the diagonal portion of the pocket to the top, but stay within the seam allowance. It's just a basting stitch to hold everything in place. So we've stitched everything nice and secure now, so we can cut off those zip ends. Don't use your best scissors, it's the only one I've got on the table, so I'm going to do it and then slap myself later. Don't tell anyone. Okay, and that's your outer front finished. So now we're ready to do the darts on the outer portions too. So let's make our darts on the outer panels. So same for both panels, and it's the same darts, same process as we used on the lining. So nice and easy. Grab both panels, flip them over and mark your darts just as we did on the lining. I've done it on that one, I haven't done it on that one. Grab my ruler, move those off for now, get in the way. You can lift that pocket piece out of the way for now. We're not going to be stitching the pocket into it. I'm only using a ballpoint pen so that you can see it. Obviously use chalk or disappearing pen. Doesn't have to be a dotted line. Makes no difference. A solid line if you prefer. And then my first one, I'll take the back panel first, because that's less obvious. So you can use that as your practice one. So we're just going to do exactly the same thing. Fold along the dart centrally. I mean, if it helps, you could even draw a central line along it as well. Anything to aid the process. So fold along the central line. Match the notches at the bottom of the darts. Clip in place. Actually, that really helped, drawing a line down the centre. I'm going to do that in future. And then stitch along the dart, back tack in at the beginning and the end of each. That's one. Nice. You can actually, I know we're going to nest these darts and we'll talk about that again. You can actually top stitch on top of them if you want, just at the sides here. But I do them differently. I do the darts down on one side and up on the other so you can still nest them, because it does get quite bulky if you're using a thick fabric. I might do that central line again because that was very handy. You learn something every day. That's my back done. Put that to one side. Let's do the front. And I'm going to put that central line on both because most useful. Lift that pocket. Get it out, road. Pocket does get in the way a bit, but just fold it up. So that's our darts finished. As I say, you can top stitch them just over the top if you want to. Just personal preference. I'll leave those, I think it looks quite nice. And then we're ready to attach or prepare our zip, our main zipper. We're bumming along with this quite nicely. So let's take our main zip. So I've cut a piece 16 inches long. The longer the piece of zip, the easier it's going to be to top stitch the bag later, because we want the puller off the side as usual. So again, I am going to staple the closed end closed, which is my open end and which is my closed end. That one. So I'll just put a staple in that for now. Zigzag stitch it if you're going to be going anywhere near it with a needle, of course. It's just this is going to be hanging off the end, so I'm not. Right, zip it to near the top and make it yourself a mark 1 inch from the top on both sides. Oops, by pen. And then at that mark, I'm going to fold the zip tape at 90 degrees so the teeth angle outwards. And then we'll pin and tack them in place. So there's our 1 inch mark. I'm going to fold the top 1 inch behind the main part of the zip tape. So I'm going to fold along that line and fold it outwards. So our teeth are staying on the top, our zip teeth. I'll show you that close up. Put a pin in it. So our zip teeth are going at right angles. So again, we want the zip teeth at right angles. Take that 1 inch mark and we're going to fold the tape. I'm tucking the tape in behind the other part of the tape so that my teeth will move around, and that mark helps me see where I want the fold to fall. Let's put a pin in there. Okay, so there again. Hopefully you can see that. So am I straight? I want them to be spot on identical. They're pretty good, not bad actually. Usually I have to do it again, have a mess about, but that's fine. So I'm just going to put a zipper foot on my machine again and stitch along the very outside of the zip tape just to hold that in place. So it's just a tack, I don't want to see it afterwards, so keep it on the far edge of the tape. Remove your pins, get rid of those and trim that up because those are notorious for sticking ends out the end of your zip. Now we'll have a look. There we go, so those are fixed in position. Those will make a nice beginning to your zip. It'll just emerge out of the bag there like that. So if you need any extra tips on how to attach the perfectly straight zip, I've linked my specific YouTube video in the text below too, so you can always have a watch of that if you've not attached zips before. So let's attach the first side of the zip, and we're going to do that to the main outer front. So let's grab a ruler. So with the right side uppermost, I'm going to make a mark on this long top straight edge, 4 centimetres or 1.5 inches in from the edge on both sides. Now it sounds like a lot, it's not, because your sides are going to come round to form almost a gusset. So your zip's only going to be this front part and your straps will be coming out the sides, so don't worry that it sounds a lot. So 4 centimetres or 1.5 is there. And make sure that your zip pullers are going to end up on the same side. So I want mine on the left, so make sure it's closed with the zip puller to the left. But if you've put this one on the other way, make sure it matches. So I've laid the zip right side down on top with the puller to the left when closed. I'm going to position the folded open end of the zip so it lines up with this 4 centimetre or 1.5 inch mark on the left hand side of the panel, clipping that in place. Open it a bit to start. So there's my 1.5 inch mark, and I want this right angle of the zip to be falling on that 1.5 inch mark, and then I'm going to clip the zip tape, the edge of the zip tape, to the very edge of the fabric all the way along. I'm going to zip it up to start with, just so I know I've got it nice and straight. Then I'll open it again. Carry on clipping it. You're now working on one side of the zip tape only. We've unzipped that, so it's a bit more flexible when you've only got one side. Clipping it to the other mark on the other side. So when we get to that 1.5 inch mark, we want to veer the zip tape down because we want the tape to pop out of the seam. So I'm going to clip it right up close, and then just at that mark, because that's where we want it to pop out, so we're going to be stitching along, and then literally we want it to go pop. So I'm going to clip that down at that side. So I'm going to stitch this all the way across. I'm going to start at this end, stitch all the way across, the 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. When I got to here, I'm going to carry on stitching at the same seam allowance so that the zip just falls below it. So there, hopefully you can see that. So it's starting there on that 1.5 inch mark. Let me get my snips. So the zip is starting on the 1.5 inch mark, or 4 centimetres, stitching along, and then it veers downwards and away. So the stitch line continues, but the zip veers down. So that means when we turn it through later, it's going to pop out the top like that. So let's attach the second side. Let's zip it up completely again, because we want to make sure we get everything nicely lined up. I'm going to make a mark on this back panel, same distance from the edge. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. So lay your outer back, right side uppermost, and then we're going to take the outer front, we're going to lay that right side down on top. Whoosh. We want the free edge of the zip tape from this to lie along the top or long straight edge of the outer back panel. So again, we're going to start it at the 1.5 inch mark on the back panel. I'll open the zip in a sec so you can see it better. I'll just put a clip in it. I'll put a couple of clips along. So I'm going to open that now. I've made sure that my panels were lying in line with each other. I know now that my zip is in line with itself. Let's open it fully. So there we go. You can pull that to one side now and you're just looking at the back panel. So it's starting at the 1.5 inch mark again. Put an extra clip in it. And we're doing the same thing as we did the other side. We're going to clip that all the way along until it reaches the mark on the other side, and then we're going to veer it down so it pops out again. So double check that your zip is the wrong side down, so you're seeing the wrong side of your zip and the right side of your back panel. I'm going to stitch along there with a 6mm 1/4 inch seam allowance again. I'll have to stitch from this side this time. So you'll be running along here. It'll already be veered down, so just keep it in the correct position with a few clips. There we are. Take that out. Give it a zip up just to make sure everything's okay. Right sides together. Yeah, double check. You can see now the right side of your zip and the right side of your fabric. Seams on the inside. And then we're going to place right sides together and we're going to clip it all the way around because we're ready to stitch the side seams. So I would leave your zip closed just while you clip it so you know that nothing's getting twisted, and open it afterwards. Again, nest these seams, doesn't matter which way they go unless you've top stitched one, so just do the back panel the opposite direction. And whichever way you push them the same on the other side. So I'll push that front one downwards, or push that front one downwards and that back one upwards. And nest them together like that. I'll undo that zip now. Now I know I haven't got anything twisted. Open it all the way. I want it well out of the way of everything. Do make sure that front pocket is unzipped at least half as well. And then I'm going to stitch around sides and bottom with a 1 centimetre 3/8 inch seam allowance. You can draw the curves on if you want before you start, if it helps. We're leaving this top edge open because that's your zip edge, so just the 2 sides and the bottom. Oh, still got a zipper foot on there, let's swap that. I'm just stopping for a minute there. This pocket is now down. I know we've tacked it at the sides, so just make sure it's nice and flat against the back or against the front panel, because we're catching that in with our stitching. Nice firm back tack beginning and end. And same as I did with the lining panel, I'm going to press those top edges open. You don't actually need to trim those top edges, it's easier if you don't. Just try and press those open to reduce bulk, and then I'm going to snip and trim just the curves at the bottom. Make sure they're nice and straight, with a tiny bump on there. It's just where I've gone over the dart. Do 1 extra stitch in there. So let's snip those bottom curves. Again, you can trim a bit off the bottom of that dart if you want to. Everything helps. Flying everywhere, these. Okay, trim them back to half. Yeah, and as I say, press those open. You could even stitch them open if it's easier, or dab a glue on them, but it does help with bulk in the end. So on to making the strap carriers. So take your strap carriers, pieces K, so there's 2 of these, and just to note that they are listed under pieces to cut with a ruler at the bottom of the cutting chart. There's not a paper pattern piece for it. So you've got 2 of these. I'm going to fold each one with the long edge to the centre. The reason you're only getting 1 here rather than 2 is I already filmed this and attached them to the bag, and then my camera cut out and lost the whole thing. So luckily it wasn't the whole tutorial, it was just that bit. So I'll just do 1 and show you again. So the reason we're only using 2 layers here, we don't fold it again like you would a strap, because we only want 2 layers, because we're going to be folding it half that way, and we don't want it to make it too bulky on the top edge of the bag, because by the time you get your seam allowances on the top edge of the bag, you're going to be making it far too thick otherwise. So just stick with 2 layers, each long side folded in, and then I'm going to stitch down each long edge with a 3mm or an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Top stitching. So there's our first strap carrier. I'm going to grab my D-ring, and that's a 3/4 inch D-ring and a 3/4 inch strap carrier. We don't want to change the width of the D-ring, so even if you go wider with your strap, keep your D-ring and your carrier at 3/4 of an inch. We don't need to go wider on the D-ring, because obviously your strap, no matter how wide, just is hanging off a swivel clasp, and it's just going to hook onto that D-ring, so that doesn't need to go wider. And we want to keep the bag nice and small and slim on the sides, so we're using a smaller D-ring. So I'm now going to stitch close up to the D-ring to just secure it in place. And I find that putting a zipper foot on my machine really helps with that. You can get a lot closer. Although it doesn't always like vinyl. Let's see. So that's secured in place, and now we're ready to put those on the bag. So as I say, I did already do it. So I've got one on already, but I'll show you on the second one. So we're making 2 of those, and then we're going to attach them to the bag. So I'm going to make a mark about 1 centimetre up from the, or not about 1 centimetre, exactly 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch up from the raw edge, just so I can get my positioning correct. So open your bag, we're on the right side of the bag. This is the zip tail side, so make sure you have the seam allowances pressed open. We're going to lay the carrier onto the outside of the bag, centered along the side seam, with the D-ring towards the body of the bag, laying downwards, and we want 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch overhang of the strap carrier over the top of the bag, and that's for added strength. So I'll just clip that in place. Make sure you keep those seam allowances open on the back. There we are. And then I'm going to stitch that in place within the seam allowance on the bag. You can just hold this zip tail out of the way. I'm going to change back to my walking foot, because obviously with vinyl it needs as much grasp as it can get. And I'll stitch that onto the top of the bag. You can stitch from the outside or you can stitch from the inside, it doesn't make any difference. Just make sure that zip tail is well out of the way. I'm choosing to stitch it from the inside so I can see those seam allowances aren't going to move. So that's attached. Make sure that D-ring is well out of the way while you're sewing as well. Don't have it popping up here or you'll have a needle breakage, which has been known to happen, obviously. Trim that up. So do exactly the same with the other D-ring and strap carrier. So that's already attached there. And it's easier with that side because your zip is separated, so lots more room. So that is our strap carriers attached. So we're on to the exciting bit now. Time to add our lining to the bag. Do give everything a nice press. Obviously I'm not pressing this because it's vinyl, but just make sure you've clipped and trimmed enough off everything that it sits nicely. If it is fabric, give it a good press. Make sure everything's sitting nicely, everything's trimmed, all your ends are trimmed, and we're nice and tidy. Make sure this zip is 2/3 of the way open. Obviously your top zip is fully open. Now I'm going to add this with the main body of the bag the wrong way out, so it's inside out, and the lining the right way out. Now I always like to have my lining inside the bag when I'm attaching it, because this allows me to check that the lining is fitting perfectly. If you have the lining on the outside of the bag when you're fitting it, then you don't know if the lining fits or not. This is going to fit because it's made quite a bit smaller than the outer bag anyway, but just in case, it's always safer to do it this way, I find. So we're going to slip the lining into the outer, so they're going to be right sides facing. And we want the pocket, the wallet, towards the back or the plain side of the bag. So you've got your outer pocket on the front of the bag here, and the pocket of the lining will be on the opposite side. So push that right in and double treble check your right side's facing. Make sure that's inside zip, that outer pocket zip is open, because we're going to turn the bag through that. We don't want to get stuck. Make sure that top zip is open, and then we're going to start clipping around the outside. So the zip needs to be pushed inside, well down inside. Make sure that those are nice and straight. Those zip tapes are nice and straight, are being pushed down inside, and then I'm going to clip at the seam allowance on the side, just to get lined up to start with. Turn it round and clip the other side. So seam allowance is open. And they're open so that we are having the least bulk possible at the top edge. So we're clipped at the sides. Now we just want to clip the whole way around. Clip or pin. And it should fit perfectly. If you've kept your seam allowances a constant all the way through, then it should fit beautifully on the top edge, and then nice and slugly inside, even snugly. So bearing in mind that this is a zip edge, we're going to keep a zipper foot on the machine, and we're going to be following along the line of the zip. So the seam allowance will still be 6mm. It won't be a full centimetre at this top edge because of the zip. It will be a zip seam allowance of 6mm or 1/4 of an inch. So zipper foot on the machine. Make sure it's beautifully snug. If you do ever find any issues with your lining not fitting, by the way, obviously you can tell in this one that it's smaller. You can see there's no rumples at the bottom and it's fitting really nicely. And that's because it's slightly smaller on these bottom edges. If you find it's not fitting at the top on this bag or any other bag, it will be normally because you've made a different seam allowance somewhere along the way on the outer than the inner. But you can always nip a little bit off your lining. If your lining's a little bit baggy, you can just come back out and increase a seam allowance slightly on the sides. Okay. So we're nicely clipped. I'm going to go the whole of the way around there with a 6mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to start with the edge where my long tails of zip are. I'm going to start over here and just keep an eye that I'm pushing those zip tails down inside. I'm going to sew from the inside, so you don't need a machine with a free arm or anything. Just keep that tail inside pushed and veered down so it's still in the correct position. We don't want to catch that zip tail in anywhere. I do like to mess about with it a little bit with clips beforehand, so I've got nothing to do when I get to the sewing machine. It should just automatically be in the correct position, because it's much harder to mess about with it once it's on the machine than it is here at this stage. Seam allowance open. I didn't press that very well, did I? Okay, so let's stitch. So I'm butting my foot right up against that zip inside. I'm going to find my stiletto, there it is, and then I can follow the zip along. I can just feel my way along as I go. When you get to the side seam, make sure the seam allowance is open and make sure the zip tape is tucked nicely down inside. If you need to use a hump jumper, you can. If you get to a real lumpy bit like the carriers, if you've got really thick fabric, you can just use a hump jumper behind the foot as you get there, and then in front of the foot as you go over it. Where's it gone? There it is. Right, I'll put it back in front now. I do have a tutorial on using hump jumpers as well, and I'll link that in below too. There we are. So stitch from the inside or the outside, whichever you prefer. So we're done. You can always go back over it if you're not happy. So we're done and we're ready to turn that baby through. So if you remember, we left a gap in the pocket. I hope you left that zip open. So let's just turn it through that gap. Push your lining back inside and clanking with that zip. Sorry. Check your zip edge, make sure you're happy with it. You can always go back in and do some tidying up if you need to. Zip it up and have a look. Yeah, that's looking fine. So I'm going to give that a really good press before I do anything else, with a pressing cloth, of course. There, I think that's looking really nice now. So we're going to close the pocket. So open the front zip and pull your pocket bag out and your pocket lining. Stop those clanking. And I'm going to clip this together at the bottom edges. So we're already folded in the bottom edges, we've folded a hem, so all we need to do is clip along there. Should already be nice and neat with the raw edges turned inwards. I'll have to bend the bag a little to get it all out. We need a nice big opening though, so we need a nice big pocket to be able to pull it through without any problems. So all I need to do now is stitch along there, close to the edge, 3mm, 1/8 of an inch. Fold that top panel back a bit easier. Trim that up and push it back inside, never to be seen again. And then we're going to top stitch the top edge of the bag. Now I'm going to top stitch it from the outside, but I have got a machine that I can use a free arm on. If you haven't, you can top stitch it from the inside, that's not a problem either. You can top stitch it with a zipper foot, which would make it easier to get in towards the edge of the zip. However, I am going to use a walking foot and just move my needle to one side a little, because the zipper foot doesn't really like this vinyl, I must say. So let's do that. So I shall start near the back on this side, go all the way around. Make sure you hold your zip tail out of the way when you get to the side seams. That extra bit of 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch of the carrier gives us extra strength inside now, especially as we top stitch over it. Go slowly over those carriers and use a hump jump if you need to. Trim up any offending threads. Beautiful. So it's time to attach our zip end. First thing to do is clip the length of our zip down, and I'm going to clip that to 5 centimetres or 2 inches long from where it emerges from the bag. We don't want a huge long zip tail now, because it just gets in the way. You can still tuck it in or have it out, but when they're long, there's nothing worse than seeing somebody's bag finished and then it's sticking miles over like this. So a nice short one is always preferable. So I'm going to chop that down. Nice straight cut. I am going to stitch over the end just briefly, just for extra security. I'm going to stitch it from upside down, just a line of stitching on there, or 10 obviously. Trim it up. Now here's my zip end. Obviously it's smaller. I've got the tiny screw, which no doubt I'll lose in a minute. If you don't want to use a metal zip end, you can just cut a piece of leather to match the width of your zip. So let me get that one out again. So cut a piece of leather to match the width of your zip. That is the width of the zip already. And just to about 1 inch long. And you can just wrap it over the end like that and just stitch it. You could also make a fabric tab for the end, so you don't need to use these metal zip ends, but they do look quite nice. In fact, you know, I'm saying that, but that would look quite nice with what we've done with the front of it, wouldn't it? No, I'll stick with the metal one for now. So metal zip end, because I won't get to show you otherwise. So move your D-ring out of the way. We're going to fold the tape backwards of the zip. You can use a little dab of glue if you want, and then grab your zip end and push it on. It's as simple as that. Then we're going to add a screw in the back, but just make sure it's sitting nice and straight, or your folds nice and straight. You can move them around a little bit if you need to. And then once you're happy, make sure it's on as much as possible and turn it over and put the screw in. This is my amazing magnetic screwdriver. I don't know what I'd do without it, because I'd never be able to pick these little suckers up. Right, in the back, screw in. I'm going to stand up because I need a bit of pressure. They're not too bad though, you know. They're easy enough to attach. One last screw, there we go. And there we are. Gives a nice professional finish. And next, I think we just have a strap. So let's put that to one side for a second. Okay, so let's make our strap. Now optionally, if you wish to make your crossbody strap from fabric rather than webbing, I have got a separate video for that, which I'll link below, and you'll also find the link in the document. So for a 1-inch strap, you'd cut your fabric 4 inches wide and then just follow the video. So we're going to make a webbing strap today. This is a 1-inch webbing strap, and I've cut to the specified length. I'm going to singe the ends just to seal them with a lighter. Kind of saves turning and under twice. So again, we're always saving bulk in sewing and bag making. Nicely sealed. If you're not using nylon webbing or you can't seal it with a lighter, then you can just zigzag stitch it also. So first of all, I'm going to thread the webbing over the centre bar of my tri-glide, and my tri-glide is the same width as my webbing. Like I say, you can make this strap in any width you want, just match your swivel clasps and your tri-glide to the width of the webbing. So I've just threaded that webbing over the centre bar of the tri-glide. I've pulled about 5 centimetres or 2 inches of webbing through, and I've folded it back on itself so the bar of the tri-glide is enclosed in the middle. So I'll clip that in place, and then I'm going to stitch with a box or 2 lines of stitching, whichever you prefer, just to secure it. Again, if you put a zipper foot on your machine, you can get closer into the tri-glide itself. Use that ruler, you don't want to look at that all the time, do you? Tidy up a bit. Okay, let's grab one of the swivel hooks. So take the loose end of the webbing and thread it through your swivel hook, your first swivel hook. And if you can try and keep that, the bit with the seam on top, we'll be able to enclose that and disguise it a bit better. So swivel hook, tri-glide. This one on, and then you're going to pass that back over the top of the tri-glide. Tighten it up a little bit, doesn't matter how much at this point. But you can see there that my seamed section or my raw edge section is enclosed inside, so it's not really very visible, nicely hidden. And then I head to the other end and I grab my other swivel clasp. Where is it? There. And I'm going to thread that on. In fact, I'm going to make sure that's straight first. Thread that on, and again, just pull 5 centimetres through or 2 inches. Clip it, and again, stitch with 2 lines of stitching or a box shape. Sorry, it is getting a bit dark here, I don't know if you can tell, but I've got all my lights on. But I wanted to get it finished. You know when you're nearly there and you just want to get it done. There we go, so that's my other end attached, so I'll grab my bag and attach my strap. Now a couple of other things we could do, obviously. We can tart this up a little bit. If you want a spare strap to change things up now and again, this is one I bought from a local market actually. And I hate to say, cheaper than I could have made it myself, but that would look nice with it as well. So you can have a couple of different straps in different widths just to keep things fresh. Also, I cut a couple of little strips out of leather. I thought that might be quite nice just to, again, jazz things up, and we can pull those through the pullers. And then add a rivet or a stitch through each of those. one on the inside too. So you can jazz your bag up as much as you want. Okay, let me put a couple of rivets in these and then I'll come back and show you what it's looking like. So I'm really pleased with how that's looking. Dead chuffed with it. Looks good even in the plainest of fabrics. I'll adjust the strap, drop my money and my phone inside, and I'm going to run out into the street and shout, "I made this!" Use it with different strap options to change the look whenever you want to, or use it without a strap at all. You can just use it for organisation, popping it into a larger tote bag. If you want to size this pattern up or down to meet your needs, you can do that very easily too. Just take a look at my instructional video on YouTube on how to resize any pattern, and the link is in the instruction document. I hope you found today's tutorial easy to follow and have enjoyed it as much as I have. If you need any help with this or any other of my patterns, or to just grab some free projects, or to share your photos, do join my Facebook group and all the links are below. So if you're ready to try one in a different fabric now for a completely different look, what are you waiting for? Let's go sew!